but a lot of recognition around the country and day of service to talk about some of the most important issues affecting the nation. My guest, Bill Noakes, Attorney Bill Noakes, the former Associate Independent Counsel, also an adjunct, right, professor at the University of Michigan, Dearborn, here as my guest. We're going to look today. Yesterday we looked at Dr. King's speech, the other America that he gave at Stanford University. Today we're looking at the war in Vietnam, and Dr. King gave the speech at the Riverside Church. I think it was April 4th, 1967, exactly a year before he was assassinated. And the war in Vietnam speech went down, I guess, in history perhaps as one of the most important foreign policy speeches. Bill, would you agree?
It was one of the greatest and most important foreign policy speech. But probably more important than it being a foreign policy speech was it was a speech that addressed human rights.
Right. A speech that addressed human rights. And if you listen to the speech itself, Dr. King creates a nexus between the war in Vietnam and the war on poverty here in America, and juxtaposing the two and raising some serious questions. But let's go straight to Riverside Church. 5 decades ago, April 4th, 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. weighs in a very strong way. Again, this would be perhaps one of the most important foreign policy speeches ever given by a non-elected official.
That's correct. And it's one of those speeches that he was convinced he had to do, despite the fact that this would be one of the speeches that would lead to his undoing as a well-recognized civil rights leader.
No question. Here is Martin Luther King Jr. at Riverside Church. Take a listen.
By turning out in such a large number, I also want to say that I consider it a great honor to share this program with Dr. Bennett, Dr. Commander, and Rabbi Heschel, some of the distinguished leaders and personalities of our nation. Of course, it's always good to come back to Riverside Church. Over the last 8 years, I have had the privilege of preaching here almost every year in that period. It is always a rich and rewarding experience to come to this great church and this great pulpit. I come to this magnificent house of worship tonight because my conscience leaves me no other choice. I join you in this meeting because I'm in deepest agreement with the aims and work of the organization which has brought us together, clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam. The recent statements of your executive committee are the sentiments of my own heart, and I found myself in full accord when I read its opening lines. A time comes when silence is betrayal. That time has come for us in relation to Vietnam. The truth of these words is beyond doubt, but the mission to which they call us is a most difficult one. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in time of war. Nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty against all the apathy of conformist thought within one's own bosom and in the surrounding world. Moreover, when the issues at hand seem as perplexing as they often do, in the case of this dreadful conflict, we are always on the verge of being mesmerized by uncertainty. But we must move on. Some of us who have already begun to break the silence of the night have found that the calling to speak is often a vocation of agony. But we must speak. We must speak with all the humility that is appropriate to our limited vision. But we must speak. And we must rejoice as well. For sure, this is the first time in our nation's history that a significant number of its religious leaders have chosen to move beyond the prophesying of smooth patriotism to the high grounds of a firm dissent based upon...
You're listening to Redline here on 910 AM. I'm Ben Clay Thompson. Next Monday is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and so what we're doing all week on this program is that we're analyzing some of Dr. King's most consequential speeches that he gave. Yesterday we looked at the speech that touched on the other America, and today we're looking at the speech on the war in Vietnam. Dr. King gave this speech at Riverside Church in 1967, exactly April 4th, exactly a year before he took an assassin's bullet. And if you want to call in and join this conversation, the number is 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600. Dr. King talks about the fact that silence is betrayal and it's time to speak up. Attorney Bill Knox here in studio with me as my guest. For the next 2 hours here on Redline, we will look at the war in Vietnam speech, its significance and its relevance today. But what is interesting in that speech itself, Dr. King basically juxtaposed, Bill, poverty and war side by side, and how resources are taken away from the poor to finance conflict that really has no end in sight.
That's exactly right. I mean, it gets back to the old adage, guns or butter. And in this particular era, Lyndon Johnson tried to do both, guns and butter, which were guns in Vietnam and pursuing the Vietnam War while trying to pursue a war on poverty at home. But limited resources of the United States, no matter how great the resources the country had, could not afford both. And so to the extent we were bombing and following up on a war in Vietnam, those were resources that were taken away from a war on poverty, which would ultimately, if it had been pursued, I would suggest, would have negated any need for the Vietnam War. In fact, it may have negated the need for some of the things that have led to wars today in Afghanistan and elsewhere.
We're also live on social media. If you have a question or comment, you can post your comments. I'll take your comments on social media as well as your questions on the phone. Let's see who's joining us on social media. I always like to give a shout out to our friends. Let's see. We have Lou Nova. I can see Zinga Masani. Manuel, we have Ishmael Baji, we have Carol Kennedy, we have Dwight Owens, we have Connie Walker-Turner, Lou Novak, of course, back with us. We have Asia Willis, Gerald Howard, Christiana Adieta Thompson, my little sister, Gina McCoy-Jones, and, of course, Kay Reeves and Brian Davis. If you have a question or comment, please fire your questions or comments on social media. Terrence, I'm coming to you in a second, but let's go back to Riverside Church. Dr. King setting the case now for what would be perhaps the most important foreign policy speech ever given by a non-elected official in American history. Take a listen.
The mandates of conscience and the reading of history. Perhaps a new spirit is rising among us. If it is, let us trace its movements and pray that our own inner being may be sensitive to its guidance. For we are deeply in need of a new way beyond the darkness that seems so close around us. Over the past 2 years, as I have moved to break the betrayal of my own silences and to speak from the burnings of my own heart, as I have called for radical departures from the destruction of Vietnam, many persons have questioned me about the wisdom of my path. At the heart of their concerns, this query has often loomed large and loud. Why are you speaking about the war, Dr. King? Why are you joining the voices of dissent? Peace and civil rights don't mix, they say. Aren't you hurting the cause of your people, they ask. And when I hear them, though I often understand the source of their concern, I'm nevertheless greatly saddened. For such questions mean that the inquirers have not really known me, my commitment or my calling. Indeed, their questions suggest that they do not know the world in which they live. In the light of such tragic misunderstanding, I deem it of signal importance to try to state clearly, and I trust concisely, why I believe that the path from Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, the church in Montgomery, Alabama, where I began my pastorate, leads clearly to this sanctuary tonight. I come to this platform tonight to make a passionate plea to my beloved nation. This speech is not addressed to Hanoi or to the National Liberation Front. It is not addressed to China or to Russia. Nor is it an attempt to overlook the ambiguity of the total situation and the need for a collective solution to the tragedy of Vietnam. Neither is it an attempt to make North Vietnam or the National Liberation Front paragons of virtue, nor to overlook the role they must play in the successful resolution of the problem. While they both may have justifiable reasons to be suspicious of the good faith of the United States, life and history give eloquent testimony to the fact that conflicts are never resolved without trustful give and take on both sides. Tonight, however, I wish not to speak with Hanoi and the National Liberation Front, but rather to my fellow Americans. That is, at the outset, a very obvious and almost facile connection between the war in Vietnam and the struggle I and others have been waging in America. A few years ago, there was a shining moment in that struggle. It seemed as if there was a real promise of hope for the poor, both black and white, through the poverty program. There were experiments, hopes, new beginnings. Then came the build-up in Vietnam, and I watched this program broken and eviscerated, as if it was some idle political plaything of a society gone mad on war.